Hello. Good to be with you this evening. I hope you've all enjoyed the beautiful weather we've had this afternoon. I found myself sat on the Hoe earlier, staring at the water, just sort of casually drifting off as the waves were coming in. So don't hold on to that thought too long, otherwise you might drift off, and then you'll miss what I have to say, which is obviously very important. Well, we're talking about Jesus. What could be more important? So I'm Jonny, I'm the student pastor here, which means I look after a lot of our sort of young adult population, most of whom have headed off back to their homes over the summer period, but some of them are still here. Just give me a little shout out if you're still a student here in Plymouth. They're quite a loud bunch, as you can tell, quite feisty. But I'm really happy to be here today. I've got the privilege of finishing off our sermon series on running with giants. And if you've been following us over the last few weeks, you'd have seen we've been talking about characters like Noah, like Hannah, like Rahab last week. And these are all amazing characters of faith. And if you've ever looked at the book of Hebrews, there's a chapter in there that goes through a list of names of people of faith, of integrity, that followed God until their last breaths. And today I'm going to be talking about someone who isn't found in that list, but is equally included because he's one of the saints that undoubtedly will meet in heaven. And it's his boldness, it's his faithfulness and steadfastness that really attracted me to speak about the guy and prophet Elijah today. So I very briefly want to tell you the story of Elijah. Just in case you ever thought reading the Bible was difficult, I'm going to try and condense the whole book of Kings up to chapter 18 in about 60 to 90 seconds, shall we say. I tried doing this last night and it took me 6 minutes, so I've really had to work on this because it took way too much time. So, Book of Kings, chapter 1. No, we won't do it that way. But basically what you've got is the people of Israel, they've come into the promised land, they're having a great time of it, and then they kind of sit there and they look around them and see that everybody else around them has a king, but they don't. So they go to God and they say, God, we would really love a king. And God's like, well, why? You've got me. Why do you need a king? It won't be very good. I'm not sure he actually added that bit, but he gives them a list of warnings why having a king would not be helpful. And they come back to him and say, yeah, we want a king though. So, is that all right? And God goes, fine, you can have a king, but on your head be it, pretty much. So they get this king, Saul. Saul does a great job up until a certain point where he does everything wrong and God abandons him. And then they get another king called David. Don't worry, we won't go through all of them. Then we get another king called David. And David is amazing. He does incredible things. He earns God's favor. God loves him, kills a guy, but does get better as time goes on. You know, asks for forgiveness as we do when we do that kind of thing. And his entire line is blessed because of his actions. And David has a son called Solomon. Solomon was extremely wise, had a lot of wives, but apparently we're just looking past that for the moment. And Solomon ends up having a son called Rehoboam. And this is where things start to really go wrong. Because Rehoboam makes a series of mistakes, oppresses God's people, causes a split in the entire kingdom. So then you've got two kingdoms, Judah and Israel, and you've got two kings on each one. And things just carry on getting worse and worse and worse until we come to chapter 18. And this is where we meet a king called Ahab. And Ahab is described as worse than anybody else before him. He desecrates God's holy places. He completely disregards the Lord. He starts worshipping this god called Baal instead, kills all the Lord's prophets, and has a real time of it. And Elijah comes up to him and says, look, mate, God's told me that unless you sort it out, I'm going to stop sending rain. And Ahab just kind of calls Elijah's bluff and says, yeah, I literally don't care, and suggests that he's going to kill him if he comes back into his presence. So the rain stops, Elijah runs, and he ends up living with a widow for 3 years. And during that time, he does a series of things, but eventually God tells him to reveal himself to King Ahab to tell him that the rain is coming back, but the people need to turn back to God. And this all happens initially through a guy called Obadiah. So if you have your Bibles with you, and even if you don't, because you have a mobile phone, I suggest, and you could Google 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 15 to 39. They will appear on screen, but there will be a short, I won't do all the verses because it's quite a lot. Then follow along with me. And it's good to have your Bible with you because it helps you to check and see if I'm lying or not, or if I'm just like giving you fake news as I stand here. You can check that I've actually said the right thing. So here we go. Verse 15. Elijah said, "As the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today." So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him. And Ahab went to meet Elijah. And when he saw Elijah, he said to him, "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" "I haven't made trouble for Israel," Elijah replied, "but you and your father's house have. You've abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." So Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah went before the people and said, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." But the people said nothing. Then Elijah said to them, "I'm the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let Baal's prophets choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I'll prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I'll call on the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, he is God." And then all the people said, "What you say is good." So we're going to have a brief pause there, because as I said, this is a very long passage, and I'm just going to summarize the next bit. So basically, the prophets of Baal, they get the bull, they cut it into pieces, they stand there and they call on the name of Baal, light this fire, blah, 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 blah. Nothing happens. They do this for like a day, they're cutting themselves and all sorts. It's a bit mad. And this is probably my favorite bit of the entire Bible, I've decided, because this is where we see God ordaining sarcasm. And that is so good for me, because I'm so sarcastic, and this can be a real problem for me sometimes. I think, maybe this is a sinful thing, but I feel like God is saying it's okay, because Elijah stands there, and he rips into these guys. And he's like, "All right, guys, so when's your God turning up? Maybe he's on the toilet. Maybe he's having a quick wee, maybe he's on holiday, maybe he's just out, checking on the flowers or something." And funnily enough, they don't really enjoy that, but it doesn't make a difference because nothing happens. So we move on to the next bit, and Elijah is starting to build the altar. And he says, with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench around it large enough to hold 2 seahs, that's 16 liters for those in metric, of seed. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. And then he said to them, "Fill 4 large jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood." "Do it again," he said. And they did it again. "Do it a 3rd time," he ordered. And they did it a 3rd time. And the water ran down around the altar and even filled the trench. And at the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, "Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord. Answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, and the soil, and also licked up the water in the trench. And when all the people saw this, they fell to the ground and cried, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." Shall we pray before I get into it? So, Father, thank you that you are indeed God. Help us to see that today as we speak about you, as we think about you. Be present amongst us. Fill us with your Holy Spirit as we sit here. And would we hear words directly from your throne room in our hearts, whether they be mine or directly from you. Amen. So, when Elijah eventually reveals himself to the people of Israel and to the king, he's been hiding for 3 years under God's command, because if he'd come out, he would have been executed. But God protected him during that time, and Elijah stayed faithful, constantly following God's commands, constantly listening to what he had to say, and staying alive, most importantly, so that he could do God's will. And it would have been so easy for him to stay in that position, I suspect. Quite a comfy sort of place, food and stuff provided for him. But God had other plans and sends Elijah out to meet Ahab, despite the risk to his life. And I love how bold his declaration is at this point. As the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today. So the first thing I think Elijah demonstrates, and the first thing I think he would say to us today is, be brave. If I'm honest, when I see Elijah's decision to face certain death, it makes me feel like a bit of a wimp. I'm not sure that I would have that bravery. But I really believe that just as in Elijah's time, God asked someone to stand up in front of a bunch of people who had no interest in God whatsoever, I think this generation needs us to be bold and brave and do the same. Because there's a voice in society today that says that all opinions are equal, but some opinions are more equal than others. And the opinion about Jesus isn't one of them. That if we talk about him, if we say his name, then it's going to cause people to be upset or angry, or could even lead to consequences for ourselves. It would be a lot easier if we just hid away and stayed silent too. But I think this is a voice that really needs counteracting, because Jesus is the only way, the only truth, and the one who gives us life. And when we speak about Jesus to people, it's not like we're trying to cause them pain or, make their lives difficult. We're actually trying to lead them into a relationship with a Father who really loves them more than they could possibly know, that can take away the aching and loneliness and sorrow that lives inside their hearts. Their amazing Creator, the one that can save them. And that's why it's so important to summon our courage. And if I'm honest, I'm really still learning how to do this. It's not an easy thing to get on with sometimes. Now, just recently, I went on a lovely holiday to Greece with a couple of friends. It was great. When we arrived, instead of the maitre d' waiting for us, there was a small cockroach in our bath, which was delightful. And we soon learned that you couldn't flush toilet paper down the toilet. It had to go in a little bin by the toilet. Greece, guys, if you want to go, it's a lovely location. We still flush the toilet paper down the toilet, but don't tell the locals. I'm not going to stop talking about poo now. So whilst we were there, we spent a fair amount of time by the pool. And whilst we spent time by the pool, there was a rep that kept coming around to talk to us. And we were a bit surprised. We didn't think there'd be reps at this particular hotel because it was a family hotel, and I just didn't think that reps would really be asking kids and stuff to go to nightclubs and stuff. But they clearly saw us and thought it was interesting to see if we would go for it. So this rep kept coming around, and she talked to us a number of times, and we were like, yeah, no, probably going to just chill out, to be honest. And the third time she came around, the third day that we were there, we kind of got talking to her a bit more, and it turned out that her name was Gintare. She was from Lithuania, and she actually really hated her job. The only reason that she was in Greece was because the 350 euros they paid her per month for working 11 hours a day was better than what she would have got paid if she'd stayed in Lithuania over the summer. And as she was talking, I started to feel kind of bad for her, but also at the same time I started to feel a bit of a prompt from the Holy Spirit. And I was like, oh, Lord, really, I'm on holiday. I do this like most of my week. No, it wasn't quite like that. But I did start to feel a bit nervous because, I don't know about you guys, but when I feel like I need to do something for God, particularly when it's speaking about him to people that perhaps don't know about him, I start to worry that if I say something, something's going to go terribly wrong. I'm going to say it wrong, and then I'm going to dishonor God in some way. And, funnily enough, that didn't happen. So we prayed for her, and as we prayed for her, she was massively surprised because she didn't know that you could pray outside of a church building, and just started to see a change in her character. Like, she closed her eyes, and her face really started to soften. I think there was even a few tears started to well up a bit as we asked Jesus to bring her peace in her life. And it just went to show, really, that even though I was nervous, speaking about Jesus to her didn't cause any harm to me, didn't cause her to burst into flames, thankfully, although the weather was very hot. It brought peace and an experience of the Holy Spirit. His name brings a power from on high that we can't possibly understand. And I've basically learned that maybe I've just been lucky and God's been really gracious to me, that when I speak about Jesus, it only ever ends in something good happening. Like you're bringing him into a situation and he promises to turn up. So for us today, I don't think there's really a limit as to how we can do this, because thankfully we don't have King Ahab standing before us threatening to execute us if we talk about the God that some people don't really like. So I think there are some really practical ways that we can try and do this in our lives, and I just want to suggest a couple to you today. And the first of which is that when you're praying in the morning, and if you don't pray, I massively encourage you to start the day with it, because it really gives you a real sense of God's presence throughout the day. You don't just go into it with, kind of blind. When you pray, ask God to put people in your path who aren't Christians. And this should be relatively simple, because there are about, 150 of us in here this evening, and there's about 250,000 people out there. So you're probably going to bump into a non-Christian at some point during the day. And that might be at work, that might be in the supermarket, it might be at the school gate, it might be just one of your best friends that you've never really taken the time to do that with. And talk to them. And also listen to them as well. And then take a breath, just breathe in, and simply ask the question, do you mind if I pray for you? They might have already talked about something in the conversation that is just perfect to pray for. But equally, you can just ask Jesus to bless them as well. Nothing wrong with that. Doesn't have to be anything complicated, and we know that Jesus promises to come when we ask him to. So nothing long-winded, nothing complicated, a very simple way of speaking about Jesus and just being a little bit more brave in our day-to-day lives. And if you don't know how to pray, I can almost guarantee that Ollie will be standing somewhere near the door at the end of the service, and I've seen get people up and praying within 3 minutes. He'll even have you praying in tongues if you're really lucky. So take the opportunity. Ollie, you know who Ollie is, he was there a second ago. So you can find him by the door later. Now, the other thing that you could possibly do is take the opportunity to practice how to tell your story of how you came to faith. And this is a really simple thing to do. 3 very easy steps. First of all, practice it's not one of the steps actually, but we'll get there. So practice with some close friends who are Christians as well, just so they can listen to you and give you a bit of feedback. The first thing you want to do, talk about where you were before you found Jesus. What was life like before he became part of your life? Secondly, where did you find Jesus? Was he under a plant pot? Was he hiding behind the curtains? Who knows? It's different for every single person. But again, this is a really just simple thing to do. And then thirdly, talk about what's changed since you found Jesus. And try and get it down to 2 minutes, because you might not have a lot of time to do this with the people that you meet on a day-to-day basis. But if you practice it, if you get it really nice and refined, then you can go out and do it in your day-to-day lives really straightforwardly. And you can pounce on unsuspecting people at parties that are sort of standing on the side, the ones that hide in the kitchen and stuff. And who knows, they might ask questions. And they might end up coming to church with you or asking you more about your faith. And know that when you do these things, God is faithful. He's with us. He said he won't abandon us or forsake us. And the worst someone you approach could do is say, no, thank you. I'm not really interested. And one of my favorite responses I've heard to that is when you ask to pray for someone and they say, no, thank you, say, oh, do you mind if I just bless you then? Because apparently they're a bit more susceptible to that. Which is basically the same thing, but keep that in here. But as we get braver and the name of Jesus is spoken more and more and more, those voices that kind of dissent and don't want to hear about Jesus get quieter and quieter and quieter, because the balance shifts. There are more and more people talking about Jesus. And it's rare that when we speak about him that a situation is left unchanged. But the task ahead is big. As I've said, there are currently around 250,000 people in this city that need to hear his name spoken and to experience his presence. And as a church, it's part of our mission to reach them. And is this task impossible for us? Probably, yeah. But we don't set out to do it on our own. So the second thing I think Elijah would say to us is, let God move. If you've ever wondered what impossible looks like, try setting fire to wood that's had 12 large jars of water poured over it. It's probably not going to happen. But Elijah tells those watching to keep doing that over and over again. I think this is what you guys, sort of the younger generation, would refer to as a big flex, right? I thought that would land better. I told the 10 that the younger people would laugh more at that one. But that's fine. You're quieter. I can get past it. Now, being a man of weak faith, I probably would have been sweating whilst the water was being poured over the wood, saying a lot of internal prayers along the lines of, please, 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 God, show up, because otherwise I'm going to look like a complete prat, which I'm more than capable of doing by myself, thank you very much. And I probably would have had a can of petrol and some matches in my back pocket as well, ready to throw on, if I'm honest. And this was kind of me with my sermon, sermon over this week. So at the beginning of writing a sermon, I'll always pray, God, I just want to see you move and you do your thing. And, I'll do sort of the preparation I need to, but I'm definitely going to give you space to work and to do whatever you want. And every single time I say that, I know that I'm probably not going to. And I'm going to get kind of hyper-stressed, and I'm going to try and write the perfect sermon that has all the right words, that's going to bring everybody to faith and everyone on their feet, clapping and roaring, and leaving no room for God whatsoever as I wake up at 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning and think of more things that I can add to my talk, as I did today. And actually, this morning I even brought some petrol and some matches with me, but I was told that that's not safe to do at the evening service, so I won't be lighting, because I was tempted to just set my sermon on fire and then carry on. Some rules about health and safety, I don't know. Another day, when Ollie's not here. You're away next month, aren't you? I'm preaching when Ollie's away, so we'll try and do it then. Probably shouldn't have told you that. So, you know what? It's actually totally okay to ask the impossible of God, because he makes the impossible possible. And we need to ask for faith to trust that he's going to come through. And to be clear, relying on God doesn't mean that we then ask him to do things that are going to suddenly make us look good. Jesus is really clear. When he's tempted by the devil in the desert for 40 days, it comes to a point where the devil's like, why don't you throw yourself off a building, because the angels are going to catch you? And Jesus quite clearly states, no, do not put the Lord your God to the test. So we don't do that. But it also doesn't mean that we sit back on our laurels and do nothing. Instead, we ask for things in prayer, and we do what preparation we can with the understanding that results of our request, even if we'd help put some of the stuff in place, is all down to God. And so ultimately, all the praise and glory has to go to him, because otherwise it wouldn't have happened. And I think Elijah shows us as well that it's okay to make bold, God-dependent prayer requests, as he calls for these jars of water to be poured over the altar. Now, he built it before it was due to be lit. And he knows that the only way that this altar is going to be lit on fire now is if God sends the fire. If it can only be done with God, then there's no way that we or anybody else can be confused as to where all the praise, honor, and glory needs to go. Straight back to him. It means that when we pray here on a Sunday to see a city transformed from 3% attending any kind of church to a place where everyone has a life-fulfilling relationship with Jesus, then at the end of the service we don't go, ooh, that was nice today, I really enjoyed that, and then just do nothing. It means taking what we've learned here and bringing it to as many people in the city as we can within our sort of possibility. Could be a colleague or mate, but we do what we can, whilst also knowing that the change can't actually happen without God intervening. So how do we leave room for God? Well, we just make whatever we're doing all about him, just like Elijah does. So we can listen for God's voice. And to get to know his voice, we need to spend time with him. And to do that, we want to read our Bibles, because that's where we see his character coming throughout history. We want to spend time praying to him, asking him to speak to us, hearing what he has to say to us. Even if it's only just a few verses a day, of reading the Bible, it doesn't have to be a ton, but it's so important to do. And when you're praying, ask God if there are any particular people, places, or needs that he wants you to get involved with. Now, also, Elijah spent 3 years waiting to hear from God. So don't be upset or worried if you don't get an immediate response as to what it is he wants you to do. And the next thing to do after you've prayed and you've listened is to take a step back. Because whilst there's nothing wrong with working for God, in fact, I would actively encourage doing so. As we've seen, Elijah built the altar and put everything in place first. But then, rather than getting the can of petrol out your back pocket, like I would, he prays diligently and lets God do the rest. Now, the theologian, I can't say words tonight. His name's not very easy to say either. Let's start again. The theologian Ignatius of Loyola, hey, he's from Spain, if you wanted to know that, he says this: pray as if everything depended on God and work as if everything depended on you. It's a partnership, but we also know that one side is clearly much stronger than the other, and that's God. And so finally, we give God the glory before, during, and after the action. Always remember to whom the praise goes. Big hint, it's not us. The highest honor always goes back to the Lord. So we've looked at bravery, and we've thought about leaving room for God. And I think the final and most important thing that Elijah would want to say to us from this passage is turn back to God. Now, towards the end of this passage, we start to see Elijah's ultimate purpose, the real thing that he wanted to get out into the open. And in verse 37, he says this: "Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." He wants to save God's people. And just as God is the only one who can come through for us in prayer, he's also the only one that can save us. Let's read that verse again. It says, "Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." So I need a bit of audience participation here. I know this isn't always like a fan favorite, but go with me. Who is it that's turning the people's hearts back to God? One person replied, and it was the right answer. Fantastic. Yes, it is God. The people's hearts might be turning, their minds might be changing, but it is God in his grace that has enabled that to happen. God's people's hearts are forever changed by him on a hill where blood and water are poured out through a sacrifice. Does that sound familiar to anybody at all? 850 years later, God sent a different sacrifice. But this time it was his own son, a man named Jesus, who, when asked, went diligently and willingly to die on a hill, surrounded by God's people. And as he died, the guards pierced his side, and blood and water came pouring out onto the wooden cross on which he'd been crucified. Also that our hearts might be turned back to God again. Who is it that turns our hearts back to God in this instance? It's God. We haven't done anything to deserve this relationship with God, and we never will. You can try for a long time. Certainly, I'm sure a lot of you have. I know I have. But we're always forgetting the most important thing. It is his actions on that cross that have saved us, not our own. And he does it in his strength, not ours. So that in all things we can only ever give the glory back to him.